For most of you, you've probably been here before when we've had Manuel Manga here. He's spoken with us a number of times, and today he's going to join us to talk about Existential Buddhism. So existential or secular Buddhism is a philosophical approach based on the teachings of Buddha without the cultural and religious narratives that historically have been added as layers to what the Buddha originally taught. This talk, based on the books by Stephen Batchelor, aims to share the core teachings that can support the development of our consciousness, well-being, empathetic relationships, and community. Manuel Manga is an organizational consultant, facilitator, and leadership coach. Let's join me in welcoming Manuel Manga.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. All right. Well, good morning. And I'm really happy to be here with you again. You know, I've been here a few times. I enjoy coming to Palo Alto and being part of this community. Several people I recognize. You are, and Arthur and Laura and a few others. So thank you. And today I have also the pleasure of having my partner, Sonia, be here with me. So she's in the back, and you know, so this is a topic that I like. I like the topic of you know, human development. First of all, you know, that's my primary, you could say, passion. You know, so I've been studying psychology for many years. I have a degree in humanistic psychology way back in the 60s and 70s. And then I went on to study social psychology at Boston University. And then I took many other types of personal development seminars along the way. You know, the 70s, we had a lot of those programs in the 80s. And also, so the topic of the developing of the human being has been with me since I started college when I was 18 years old in New York City. So I was being curious, right, about how do we become more human? How do we develop our humanity and our mind? And later on, when I studied social psychology, I was curious, well, the individual has a responsibility to develop themselves, but how does the larger social system either supports that development, enhances it, or gets in the way, right? Gets in the way. So you can either support it or get in the way. So I started social psychology, and I came across people like Eric Fromm, great, you know, he's called a social psychologist, and because he could see the relationship between the individual and the society, you know. And of course, the ideal is the individual does their best to develop their mind and develop their potential, and the society does their best to support that individual to have their best. So that's the ideal system. We don't quite have it that way yet. We're working on it. Humanity is still working on it. How do you get those two things working in sync, right? So anyway, so I've been curious about this stuff. And then I became, after being a psychologist, I became an organizational consultant, as Laura said. And I went to working in a large corporation, and then my task was to understand leadership and understand the mind of the leaders and understand the development of the leader's mind, and then how to develop the organization. So in a way I was doing the same. The leader is the individual, the organization is the society, the group. How do you, those two things are the best? Except here the context was a large multinational corporation that I worked for 12 years back in Boston. And, but I learned a lot. So working there, I learned a lot as an organizational consultant. And then I said, well, how do we deal with the change in society? So after I left working there, I then started my own consulting company, and I started to develop my own concept of leadership, which some of you came to my presentation on evolutionary leadership, which I did here several months ago. Because, once again, I think we need to also develop the society, the social evolution that we need, not just the individual evolution. Well, that's just a brief introduction to how do I come to Stephen Batchelor, right? Because I'm always curious. I go between readings, the individual, reading the society, the individual, the culture. And many, many years ago, when I first came to the Bay Area, San Francisco, there used to be a place called the Zen Center in San Francisco. Anybody's been through it? And they were teaching Zen. And I was curious. I was curious. Well, okay, I studied Western psychology. Let me try a little Eastern psychology. So I went to the Zen Center and listened to the Roshis, and Zen is pretty down to earth, so it was kind of practical, Zen Buddhism, and you just sit and chant, but you don't have to believe in anything. So I said, oh, that's pretty good. So, and I did that, for a while, read the books by all the Zen masters, like Suzuki Roshi, who wrote a beautiful little book called Beginner's Mind, Zen Mind. Always to have a beginner's mind. So it's a good quality to have a beginner's mind. No matter how old you are, always be curious, wonder, living in wonder. So I'm still living that way, So that was like 1968 when I first discovered Zen Buddhism. But then I didn't do much about that, and then about a couple of years ago, I ran into an old bookstore and reading people and bookshelves, and I was at a friend's house, and I came across the work by Stephen Batchelor, and his book is called, let me see, I have it here, Buddhism, this one here, Without Beliefs. Buddhism Without Beliefs. And I said, wow, that's an interesting title. I'm a humanist, I'm secular, I don't have any religious belief, although, I'm sure there's some of you here who may have religious belief. And I said, Buddhism without belief, that's interesting. Because a lot of Buddhism has a lot of religious, historical connotation to it. Even Zen has some. There's different branches of Buddhism. So I said, Buddhism without belief. And I read it, and I said, wow, this is really good stuff. This is like existential philosophy with a Buddhist principles approach. So, so I liked it. So what I'm going to do today for the first 30 minutes is to, our purpose today is to have a conversation in which I'd like to share with you some of Stephen Batchelor's main ideas, and of course some of my own, share some of my own insights about it. Because reading Stephen Batchelor was really very stimulating, and he brings all the philosophical perspectives into Buddhism. And also what I like to do is to have a conversation with you. So I will talk for about maybe 25 more minutes. I've been talking already for 5 minutes, so I'll talk another 25 minutes. And then we'll leave it open to have a dialogue, a conversation here. And I believe we're supposed to end at 12:15 sharp, right? Okay. So, and by the way, so if you have any clarification questions, they're welcome. I'm going to be using some English and most of the time, English, but there'll be some Buddhist terms that you may or may not be familiar with. So if there's a Buddhist term that you don't understand, I will try to explain it anyway, but if you want something more, raise your hand and ask me any kind of clarifying question. Is that okay? Cool? Okay. So, so that's what we do. So these are two books which I'm gonna mainly talk about. Stephen Batchelor's book, Buddhism Without Belief, and he's got another one that's also that I've been reading called Alone with Others. Alone with Others. It's kind of a paradoxical title because we are alone, yet we are also in relationship with other people. So it's kind of the human condition. And then I'm going to mention a little bit towards the end a book by the Dalai Lama that I think is very similar to Existential Buddhism, because I think the Dalai Lama has evolved. And in this book, Beyond Religion, he basically says we need a secular, ethical, global system to make humanity one harmonious family. You know, so he says, and he says in his book, I know it's strange to say that coming from a person who's been a monk, right, all my life, but basically he's saying I'm putting myself out of a job. That's what he's saying, basically. And he says it. He says, look, I know I'm a monk, but I think we need a new system. And so he proposes a new ethical system for all of humanity. Interesting enough, based on science. I mean, the guy has done his research into neuroscience. I mean, the Dalai Lama is a very curious mind. So he doesn't let his religious stuff necessarily get in the way of his curiosity and his passion for contributing to humanity. So I think this topic of existential Buddhism is very appropriate, I think, for a humanist community. Whether you have religious orientations or not, I think it's good for everyone. So I figured I want to share this with the humanist community, because sometimes in the humanist community, there's a feeling of, we don't want to have anything to do, anything sound, spiritual, or this or that. I mean, there's some reasons for that, to be skeptical. But I think existential Buddhism has a lot to offer. Okay? So let's, so I said about a few thoughts about that. I'm going to go back to those two books. So before we get into Stephen Batchelor's work and explain what existential Buddhism aims to do for us human beings, I'd like to share this model of my own. So this is now Manuel's mind at work, okay? This is my mind at work. And because I say, okay, let's look at the human journey first. Like whether you're Buddhist, whether you're humanist, whatever you are. Number one, it says human nature, biology. So everyone here is part of the human family. We all have a biology. We share the same genes. We share the brain, and so we are 99.9% the same. And I think people should know that. That's part of what I think we need to still learn. And then there's human nature. There are different opinions about human nature, whether we are all good or all evil or destructive or constructive or greedy or altruistic. So there's still some range in there about human nature. The Dalai Lama says, I choose to think that human beings are loving. That's his position. I think that humans are by nature loving, compassionate, etc. This is what he claims. So we all have something around human nature. We all have that. On the other hand, then we go to number two, and we are born, whether you're born in the United States, I was born in Colombia, you're born into a culture. You didn't ask for the culture, right? Anybody said, I want to be born in Palo Alto, or I want to be born in Colombia? You're not. You don't choose. I was born in Colombia. I said, God, this is an interesting culture, right? There's some nice things here. We have carnival. We dance. We do a lot of family stuff. But we're also crazy. There's also a lot of violence and all this stuff. So, we're all born into a culture. The culture then takes over and shapes us as a human being, shapes us. And most of us stay shaped by a culture. The culture has like a grip on you, on your mind, and on your being. And then we move on to number 3, which I realize is hard to read, but I'm going to read it. It's called the existential questions. Every human being, when you become more or less 14 or 15 or 20, or whatever, 30, 50, you at some point, you begin to ask the existential question. That's what number 3 is. And you're going to see that Stephen Batchelor focuses a lot on number 3, on the existential questions, because he claims that Buddhism, existential Buddhism, is a good manual for answering the existential questions that all human beings have. So we're going to go back to this topic of existential question in a few minutes and see what the Buddha said about it and what Stephen Batchelor says about it, and then we'll probably wind up with what the humanist community has to say about it, right? And what do you have to say about it? But we all have those existential questions, so they are sort of inescapable. You can watch a lot of TV or go to the 49ers game. Today is a 49ers game, right? Football, people getting ready. We're in the Caltrain and people got their uniforms and they're all ready to play football. But sooner or later they have to deal with the existential question after whether the 49ers win or lose. Who cares? Some people care, but after that you still, can't avoid those existential questions. And then number 4, there's human agency and possibilities. That's the good news. So if you manage to get yourself out of culture a little bit, sort of like, get yourself out of the cultural trappings, you may get to human agency and say, wow, what can I do with myself? Who am I? Well, do I have freedom to be somebody different, right? Now, I had a little help. My mother said, we're going to the United States. So she got me out of the Colombian culture and brought me to New York City, and I felt good. I was 13 years old. I said, yes, free at last. New York, free at last. So that's how I felt. And, then I started studying psychology. My mother said, why are you studying psychology? Why don't you become an engineer? Get a job. That kind of stuff. So I've managed to avoid, right? The cultural trapping. Because in Colombia, if you're a guy, you're either an engineer or a doctor. You got 2 choices, right? Engineer or a doctor, right? And so I managed to become a psychologist. And so human agency. And we all have that freedom to design who we want to be. A lot of people don't use that freedom. A lot of people don't exercise. In fact, Eric Fromm, and anyone here has read Eric Fromm? You have, a few of you. He wrote a famous book way back in the 50s. It's called Escape from Freedom. Interesting. Escape from freedom. Humans, they say they want freedom. We go to war to have freedom. And the minute you have freedom, you go, that's too scary. I don't want too much freedom, right? Escape from freedom. Tell me what to do. Wear the uniform, right? Etc. So that's human agency. Any questions or comments about the human journey so far? So far, okay? All right, good. So what are some of the existential questions? This is what Stephen Batchelor says. And he goes through them very much in both of his books here. He says, what is life? What is life? What is being? How are the potentials? of life, how are the potentials of life to be actualized? Interesting. How are the potentials of life to be actualized? Because we all have potential. Everyone here in this room have potentials. But how do you actualize it? That's the trick. Everyone does a different thing. Some people go to school, some people go to work, some people do other stuff. What is the purpose and meaning of life? Okay? How and where can I find a well-defined purpose and meaning? How and where? And of course, you can see, depending on what culture you live, that question is answered by the culture. Where? You go to this school, you go to this church, or you go to this temple, or you go to this community, right? That's where you go to find the meaning. And how to achieve happiness. Because one of the things the Dalai Lama says is that we human beings, we all have a desire, a motivation for happiness. Every human being. No one gets up in the morning and says, today I think I'll suffer. I think I need some suffering today. Maybe if you're in France or you're existential and you're writing a novel, you want to suffer. But most of us, you don't get up in the morning and say, I think I need some. Most of us say, I want some happiness, right? And then what is the good life, an ethical life? Now, this is tricky here. A lot of people don't ask this particular question, especially the ethical life. They say, what's the good life, maybe? And of course, in America, we all know what the answer is. Good life is have a lot of money, get a job, buy a Mercedes-Benz, a BMW, something like that, and then you'll be happy. A big house. Then there's death. Ta-da! Death, the big drama. But, it's always there. It's life certainty. No one doesn't have to deal with it. So that's a big existential question. And how to deal with death, right? So those are the big existential questions. And Stephen Batchelor says existential Buddhism provides you with both answers and a meaningful way to get to those answers. Now, existential Buddhism, the way Stephen Batchelor presents it, is not the only way, by the way, to get to those answers. I think the humanist community also has their own, you could say, contribution to those questions, as well as other philosophers. People like Heidegger and other people have given this a lot of thought. So those are the big ticket questions. Now, one thing that, let me draw here quickly. I'm going to do this little bit of drawing based on one of the Dalai Lamas in his book. He says, if we look at these two pillars, he says, number one, so if we take, for example, how to achieve happiness, one of those questions. He says, the Dalai Lama says, by human nature, so if you put that like as the foundation of this house, by human nature, every human wants to be happy, wants happiness. So he says that's principle, he calls this principle number one. Principle number one in his ethical format. Principle number one, that every human being wants to be happy, seeking happiness. So that's his principle number two. And principle number two is that all human beings, we are interdependent. Interdependent. Hope I spell it right here. Interdependent. So those are, by nature, we're interdependent, by nature. Our being, our structure, our biology, we are interdependent with each other, genetically, socially, and we are also interdependent with nature, with biology, we're interdependent with the living system, with ecology, and of course, modern thinking has forgotten some of this part, the interdependent part. We think we have separated ourselves from nature, right? The ecology, planet Earth, you know. So those two principles with a purpose are a purpose for making the human family harmonious is, in a nutshell, is what the Dalai Lama says is the structure for a global ethics. But we need to be able to base whatever we do on those two principles and that purpose, okay? So I'm jumping ahead a little bit because this is what the Dalai Lama says in answer to the question, how to achieve happiness, okay? How to achieve happiness, okay? So just jumping ahead a little bit here. So then there is, this is another strong point that Stephen Batchelor makes in his book. He says, okay, we all want to be happy. However, what gets in the way? You know, so he's now presenting us with the journey, back to the human journey. Everyone, as the Dalai Lama said, by nature wants to be happy, but something along the way comes here and gets in the way. It blocks that driven, that motivation towards happiness. What is it that gets in the way? What Batchelor says, our thrownness, our pull towards having. So he says human beings have these two motivations, having and being. And right now, he says, we are way over in the having track of being, you know, having. So he says our worldview is dominated by the notion that the aim of personal existence is fulfilled in proportion to what we are able to amass and possess. Interesting. So your sense of who you are is we're able to amass and possess. So everything becomes a potential for having, everything. So then you could say we live in a culture, again, we see now the role of culture. We live in a culture of having, not just in America. We live in a culture of having. So you're born and you want to be happy, except the culture says to be happy, guess what you have to do? You have to have more. You have to amass and possess. So it's no wonder that we live in such a consumer society like America, right? It's no wonder. And where's that coming up with Black Friday, they call it? Black Friday, like people wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning to go to Walmart and they're standing in line, and a couple of years ago, like there was a riot, and somebody got killed in the riot, right? Because people wanted to get in there early to buy their TVs. It's kind of strange, right? So we live in this consumer society, and of course, the more we have, you know, if you have a 40-inch TV, it's good for a year. It makes you happy for a year. Then your friend has a 50-inch TV, and you got to have now a 52-inch TV. Because you have to also keep up with the Jones, you know, the whole expression. And it keeps going. I have a friend back east who I went to his basement in his house, and he has like a 70-inch TV. I mean, this thing is amazing. It's like going to a movie. I said, it's really amazing. So anyway, you have to have. This is the culture. So the culture gets in the way of our purpose. The culture gets in. And what does Stephen Batchelor says is the other alternative? Well, the other alternative from having is being. Being. Now, it's easy to say, being, because if I ask you, give me your definition of being, maybe we get 20, 30, 40 definitions of being, right? So it complicates things a little bit. There's the existential definition of being, there's the religious definition of being, there's the psychological definition of being, etc. But being is the other track on which to go in life. So here Batchelor says that the primary purpose of Dharma is to reestablish a consciousness of being, an ethics of being. So it's to get us from the track of having to the track of being, to get us out of there. So first, to make us aware that we are kind of caught in this track called having. And this is where most of us Americans are, and most of the world today is, right? You know, look at the consumer. I mean, we consume everything that's made in China, right? Everything practically that we buy nowadays is made in China. They make it, we buy it. And they buy our stuff, and we buy their stuff. And you could go everywhere and buy Coca-Cola. Everywhere. You know, you could go anywhere and there will be a Coca-Cola machine there. In any school in America, there'll be a Coca-Cola machine. You can have Coca-Cola. It makes you happy. That's the slogan, right? Buy happiness. So being. So the primary purpose of Dharma is to get you to being. So the Buddha says, here, this purpose, you want to be happy, is being. To be happy. You know, and to learn how to generate your own happiness. To generate your own happiness. So that's the primary purpose of the Dharma. Everyone familiar with the word Dharma? Some people are. So if you're not, you have to raise your hand. Okay, so I get a sense. Don't forget, you can ask clarifying questions, right? Don't be shy. If you see something, go, what is he talking about? Well, the Dharma. Okay, the Dharma is, in Buddhism, is considered to be the path, the methodology. So there is a methodology called the Dharma. Okay, it's like going to, you know, college and saying, I want to learn how to be a doctor or be a psychologist. There's a methodology. Is that clear? So the Dharma is the methodology towards being and happiness. That's it. So it's not a mystery. It's not a mystery. Okay. So what does Buddhism offer in its systemic approach to happiness? It offers three things. So it's a system. Some people do one and some people do the other, but ideally the way the Buddha conceived of this thing was three things. One, it consists of meditation, the developing of mindfulness. Meditation just happens to be one way. It's not the only way, but the whole concept is mindfulness, developing your mind, your consciousness, expanding it to include. Most people have, by human nature, most people have what we call an egocentric mind. Egocentric, me first. And it takes work to break out of the egocentric mind to develop a mindfulness to include others, to include the human family. So it takes work. It doesn't come easy. We, as I said, by I think Arthur would say by human propensity, right? Yeah, something like that. By human propensity, our human nature makes us egocentric and tribal-centric. So you identify with your own tribe first. And you say, I take care of my tribe first, and then if I have enough, I'll take care of your tribe. But first, my tribe. Survival of my tribe first. So that's kind of, so this mindfulness is to expand that concern, expand that consciousness, and include a wider range of people and the whole of humanity. Now, the Sangha means in Sanskrit, I believe, it means the community, the community. To do this, you cannot do it alone, the Buddha said. You need a community of people, just like this humanist community. You need support. You need other people, right? You need support. You need emotional as well as intellectual support. So that's the Sangha, and you need to come together and support each other in order to do the most difficult work, because the most difficult work is here, in the Dharma, in the application, in the methodology, in the living it day to day, and not only doing it with yourself, but doing it towards the service of humanity. Because some people think that Buddhism is only about enlightenment of the individual, but it's also the enlightenment of humanity. So the work is both individual and social when it's understood that way. So the Dharma is the journey, the path, the methodology that requires you to continue putting this into practice. Now, the Buddha recommended in the Dharma something that he called the Eightfold Path. That is like an ethical system of 8 things that you could do, 1, 2, 3, 4, like, right living, right eating, right friendship, right action, right work. So there's this ethical system in the Dharma that helps humans live a more ethical, mindful life by calling it right work. So if you are doing some work that is killing the planet and the species, the Buddha would say that's not right work, right? By nature, you will question it. Okay, questions about that? Any? Okay, I'm going to talk a few more minutes, and we'll open it up for large group discussion. So, how does existential Buddhism differ from others? Other types of Buddhism. It's not focused on karma. So there's no concept of karma, like, your karma. Some people interpret it. It's an interpretation that you are trapped in this thing for life. It's like if you were born in a particular situation in India and you happen to be in a particular type of, culture, sect, well, that's your karma. There's nothing much you can do about that. That's one interpretation. Not focus on rebirth. Some Buddhist people think you're going to come back after your enlightenment, and not focus on that. Not focus on religious dogma or practices. Not bound to any particular cultural tradition or dogma. So when Buddha started teaching Buddhism 2,000 years ago, he was born in India. And what happened? If you're born in India, the Indian culture, which was mostly Hindu and still is, will try to tell you, shape it to be more Hindu. So he had to kind of fight against the culture of that day. But then as Buddhism spread, it went to Thailand, it went to Japan, it went to China. Every culture that it went, Buddhism became Tibetan Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism. And every culture put their own little flavor on it. And Batchelor says a lot of people nowadays get trapped in the culture of flavorings rather than the essence of Buddhism or what the Buddha taught. So this is why existential Buddhism is what he says is what's needed. Not the cultural trappings, whether you wear an orange robe or a black robe or pink robe. It doesn't matter. And then finally, it's not focused on metaphysical phenomena. So this is pretty radical, because a lot of people go into Buddhism seeking metaphysical stuff, seeking rebirth, seeking, some other stuff. And he said, no, that had nothing to do with the original teachings. So I think it's in many ways, it's very secular. So what are some benefits of practicing some of the Dharma? Some of these practices. Well, you could have reduced stress. Nowadays, a lot of medical doctors recommend meditation to almost everybody, right? You walk in, they say, oh yeah, you should. It's good for your blood pressure. So it's good. So it reduces stress, it's good for the blood pressure, it's good for the brain. Neuroscience says, yeah, meditation is good. It rewires your neurons. This is what's happening nowadays. It's good for mindfulness. is being part of a tradition, being part of a community, having an ethical system. So a lot of people say, okay, so I'm going to not have my religion, and you kind of leave your religion behind, some people. And I know I did when I was 14 in New York. Then the question was, well, how do I navigate? Which is my system, right? It took me a while to make it up. So it gives you an ethical system based on these two principles. You know, we all want happiness, and we are all interdependent. And what's our purpose? Happiness and being, not having. Okay? Nothing wrong with having. You can still have, you know, your car. Where's Laura? Laura has a she has a nice Toyota truck that I really like, a 1996 Toyota pickup. And yeah, it's good. I mean, you know, why should you have a Mercedes-Benz? This thing works pretty well. Okay. Okay. And another benefit is empathy, compassion, love. Who doesn't want that? We all want that. And then having some answers to existential questions. And now, we today, this is 2,000 years since the Buddha started doing his teachings, but today, in the time of the Buddha, the world was not as crazy in some ways as it is today. The Buddha didn't, you know, he was addressing human issues, but today we have planetary, global issues that affect the happiness, not just of humans, but the happiness of the species, the happiness of the planet, and the happiness perhaps of the future of our children and humanity. So today we have a bigger challenge than the Buddha had. You know, his challenge was, how could I get you to be more conscious and loving as an individual? Well, today we have to deal with the whole shebang, you know, the planet. So today we have several challenges in front of us. Climate change, global water shortage. We need more rain in California, right? More rain, yay! Etc. Species extinctions, growth without limits, on sustainability, etc., etc. So we have some big challenges in front of us. So whatever system of ethics we develop, it has to deal with this. It cannot say we're going to make you happy and not deal with that. So the good news is the Dalai Lama, and I think proposes that. That the new ethics has to work for the whole global human family. So today Buddhism, one could say existential Buddhism, has evolved, which is good news. So it hasn't necessarily kept back 2,000 years ago, but it's people like Batchelor and people like the Dalai Lama who have evolved their consciousness to say, not only are we here for the happiness and welfare of the human, the individual, but of the whole human family. So in ending, I want to end with these questions that we have here. How can we apply, how can you apply existential Buddhism to your life? These are potential questions for the group. How can existential Buddhism contribute to the humanistic movement? And how can existential Buddhism contribute to this Silicon Valley humanist community? So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions, comments, anything that you want to present. Okay? Thank you.
Oh, and it's a 94. It's not a 96.
It's a 94. It's even better.
I was wondering what Buddhism thinks about the golden mean, because for one extreme on one side, you have the extreme on the other. For instance, I have a toaster that I bought in 1960, and I can't let go of it because I love it so much.
I think the golden mean, I think that there is I would say in the Eightfold Path of Buddhism not to go to extremes. That's so you don't want to deprive yourself of having. So it's not like I'm going to renounce all my having and not have a toaster and a car. But on the other hand, I don't think we all need to have 5 TVs in a house. So so I think that middle path is the right thing. What they call the middle path, whatever that means to each person. Other question? Yeah.
What is the importance of love? I mean, to me, that's the central question.
Right.
With humanity and the world and our existence.
So what is the central?
How do you define love?
Okay.
And to me, that's the basis of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love of of all people and of humanity.
Well, exactly. Now, it's good because most people interpret love in a very romantic way. Romantic. I love you romantically. And what the Dalai Lama and what Buddhism and I would say people like Eric Fromm define love more as a concern for the relationship, concern for the other, the interdependence. So love will be part of this here, not just love for yourself, but others, including love for nature. Huh? Yes. Yeah, so it's a more expansive. And the other thing that the Dalai Lama would say is you have to put love into ethics, into action. A lot of people talk love like a concept, but it's not put into action. Okay?
It's not selfish.
No. Okay, so we got this one here. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a belief, well, an idea that neither Christianity, a lot of other religions, have answers to a question that I think Hinduism has, in a sense, but I don't know if Buddhism does have. The question is this. Suppose a child is born and is born without eyes or without feet, then next door a child is born that's 100% perfect. Okay, now the eye, obviously the first child and the second child, they look like their parents somehow, okay? But the eye, that thing that's called me, why the me would be in that troubled child versus the other. Whereas in Hinduism, they will say, well, we were all created as nice entities, and we had freedom, and we became bad guys or gals, and then we're reincarnated to suffer from the bad. Now, what does Buddhism have an answer to that?
Existential Buddhism would say that would disagree with the Hindu interpretation, would disagree. Would say this person was born this way, we need to do something for their well-being, but not because you did something or anything like that.
But does it answer the question why that person, that entity, that being was born in that person?
No, because when Buddhism was created 2,000 years ago, they didn't know too much about biology. They didn't know about natural evolution, so they didn't. If you ask the Dalai Lama today, we say, well, it's got something to do with the biology, right? Because he's a scientist, But the original Buddha had no answer for that. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think religion and culture are always tied into each other. You can't really separate them. And American culture is a very individualistic culture. And I found that American Buddhism tend to be very individualistic as well. There's a lot of focus on self-enlightenment, self-happiness. There's a lot of talk on compassion, and I found lacking in this talk is the suffering. Not the suffering of self, because I think there's some talk about it, but suffering of other people. Okay, and I find it a little bit upsetting that people don't want to talk about it. Maybe it's because the whole suffering concept makes people unhappy. They don't want to hear it. But on the other hand, you don't have compassion if you don't know the suffering of other people.
So my answer to you is yes, culture and religion are very strongly intertwined, very strongly. But they can be separated depending on the culture. For example, at least in this country, by constitution, we are a secular country. So is India, by the way, and so is Brazil. Some countries are by constitution, by design, separate culture from religion. Other countries do not do that. Other countries merge the two things. So I think at least one thing I like about the United States is there are division between religion and the institution. Now, I agree with you that America is also very individualistic culture, and there's too much focus on the self. And I agree with you. That's why I went on to study social psychology, because you could stay on the path of individual psychology all your life, but I say today we need individual transformation, but we also need social transformation. We need both, not one or the other. We need both. And finally, I think at least this is where I think today we need to focus. There's a lot of suffering there. If you look at that slide, there's a lot of suffering there. We are killing species every day. Species are suffering every day. So if you pay attention to what's going on the planet, you cannot say there's no suffering. You have to have compassion. We need to have compassion for the animals that are disappearing, for the humans who don't have food, etc. So I agree with you that the suffering is not to be avoided. Okay? Somebody else?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on your chart there, and you talk about human nature being what causes us to seek happiness, and I'd say love comes from human nature too, but that's got a biological basis, and it's not really universal. On the average, human nature creates those things, but there are always outliers. There are always people who don't love anyone, who really want to be alone.
Yeah, sure.
Who probably want to die. So what we're dealing with is a general rule that applies to most people. Yeah,
the general rule. There's always exceptions, right? There's always exceptions. There are people who, whether they don't want to love other people, or they want to, they do bad things, right? I mean, look at Hitler. I study leadership. Hitler was a sick guy. He was a psychopath. So look at all the killing he did. Hitler. How the hell did he get in power? I mean, you have to study the rise and fall of the Third Reich to understand how Hitler and you could say, the German culture contributed to the rise of Nazism. Yeah, there are always people like that, right? It's Stalin. Look at Stalin. How many people did he kill? More like 30 million people. 30 million. How could one person get away with killing 30 million people? You need a system. You need a culture. You need a fear. Not love, fear. And most leaders rule with fear. So that's where emotions play an important part. The next evolution is going to be, how do we bring love into our institutions, our organizations, into our leadership, into our culture? How do we make love, a strong foundation in our culture? Because so far it's been fear. Look at this thing over here. Look at this thing over here. Excuse me 1 minute. I'm going a little bit on a rant over here. Well, now I messed up. Can you help me out with the slides? I mean, look at that one in the slide that I had. I had nuclear proliferation, right? Nuclear weapons of mass destruction. Why do we have nuclear proliferation on this planet? Why? Fear. You have 30 atomic bombs, Pakistan. I'm going to have 30 atomic bombs, India, right? Fear. Okay, so that was my answer to your question. So, So we need to put love in there.
Yeah, I did want to make one other comment.
Okay, go ahead.
People talk about being happy by focusing on, or dealing with death by focusing on something that will live after you. But it seems to me, if you're seeking happiness by focusing on something else, you should try to be happy if you knew the whole world was going to come to an end next week.
Yeah.
That's a little more difficult.
Yeah, it is. It is. Okay, thank you. That's a challenging question. It made me think of things like Hitler and stuff like that. Normally, that's another lecture.
Yeah. I would like to talk about one thing, which is, I think there's a small trap in the world of, I think there is a small trap in the thing when we're talking about being happy. Because what does it mean to be happy? I think that life is a series of experience, good ones and bad ones, right?
Right.
And I know what it means to feel happy. I don't really know what it means to be happy. Sometimes people are asking, am I a happy person? It's really hard to answer that. I mean, it's too big thing. I think it's about experiences of feeling happy. And when we're talking about like money or buying new TV or buying a new car, sometimes we thinking just, it's not buying TV or buying a car. I'm buying new experience. I'm buying experience of having this huge TV, and I'm buying Ferrari to feel drive of that car. And I think sometimes people searching so much money and resources not to have those things, is to have those experiences that coming with that.
I agree.
And I think that's making our life rich of these experiences that they coming, happy and unhappy, but just to putting ourselves in that. I think the big trap in searching for being happy is sometimes to change ourselves to zombie that will say like, I'm a happy person. Hi guys, I'm happy, right? I think it means nothing to say I'm happy. I think it means something to have series of happy moments in your life and increase these experiences in your life. I think that's sometimes where the trap of searching money is, because we're searching for experiences, really, not really the objects.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let me just say briefly that, so the goal, the purpose, one could say every person wants to be happy, and you're saying, well, yeah, but happy means happy experiences. I agree with that. What Stephen Batchelor would say is that we live in a culture in which the road to the experience of happiness is through having. And having does, you do buy the Ferrari, or you do buy that whatever you buy, it does give you a momentary experience of happiness. It does, but it does not last. And what the other path, the journey of being, and being, you are able to generate your experience of happiness regardless whether you bought something or not, whether you have something or not. So here, you are the generator of your happiness, of the experience of happiness, whether you have the material thing or not. So you learn how to be that. Now, most people are passive. They're waiting for the experience to come to them, as opposed to they generating internally that what the Dalai Lama would say, an abundancy of being, an abundancy of happiness. Okay, so that's so it's the, but you need to learn the methodology to do it. It's like going to the gym. I'm going to the gym now. I've been going to the gym now for like 3 or 4 months, and I'm learning how to develop new muscles that I didn't know about, I have forgotten about. And I go to the gym, and the guy said, well, you got to stretch this elbow this way, and then you got to stretch this one. I go, geez, that hurts. He said, it's going to hurt for a while, but I have to learn how to generate in my muscles that experience of well-being that I've forgotten about. Thank you. We still have 5 more minutes, right? So 12, 15? Yeah, good.
Hi.
Yeah, Martin,
Manuel.
go ahead.
I'm going back to your questions and how do we do all this, right? To me, from a material sense, it's sort of quite straightforward. In science, we pretty much know it, I think, right? We need to stop using fossil fuels, travel less without fossil fuels. We need to live more densely. We need to use the sun better, and we need to free up more space for the species. So from the material point of view, I think we all know what to do every day to get up and do that. Some of us are in denial, but most of us in this room probably do. The challenge to my mind, is more our mental world and our emotional world. I mean, that's what I see. Every day we get up and we have to make this human world work, 6 billion of us. And I'm involved in a number of communities, and, you know, people have histories, people have pasts, they don't like somebody, somebody's hurt them. You know, if you're married, there's been affairs. In the Middle East, there's people who've killed your sons and your daughters and blown them up. And even in communities like this, I'm in the HOA, and you've got neighbors that don't like neighbors. You know, you let your washing machine, and they hate each other, they don't want to talk to each other anymore. In the humanist community, right, we have these wonderful values.
Right.
But different people don't trust other different people. They can't work with them anymore. Somebody wants the website one that way, the website that way. When do we have the forum? What do we have for lunch? You know, and that's the reality. And the disagreements that come up there, and the lack of tolerance and love in those environments, to me, seems to be where we all move apart and start traveling and start burning up the fossil fuels just because we can't. So I don't know. I mean, basically...
What's your question then?
My question is, we need more love. I'm trying to answer your questions with an answer, which is, I think, love and tolerance and acceptance of people that, or maybe neuroscience and science has the answer, because from what I understand, we can now take away some of those bad memories with science. So maybe we just treat people that can't get on with people, but just removing the memories of the people they don't like. I don't know, but that's where the issues lie.
No. Let me answer your. I'm going to try to answer your question or your comment, Martin. I agree with you that we are in a global mess. So number one, we are in a big global mess that we need to deal with, whether we call it climate change or we call it poverty and war in the Middle East, everywhere. We're in a global mess. Okay, so we need to deal with that. And part of the answer of that global mess is individual transformation. You know, and I think Buddhism has a lot to contribute to that, and you know, individual, and you change your mind and all of that. However, that's not enough. I say, and a lot of people would say, individual transformation, individual happiness is not enough. We need to deal with this thing here. We need to deal with culture. We need cultural transformation too. That's why I said the formula for the future, and I think the Dalai Lama is on the right track, but he's saying we need a new ethical system for dealing with the culture of humanity. So you cannot just talk individuals anymore. We need to talk cultural transformation, global transformation, as well as individual transformation, okay? And he proposes, and that's what this book is about. It's called Ethics for a Whole World, okay? An ethical system. Now we need to teach this and put it into practice beyond individual. Here, two more over here.
Well, one thing that goes along with love for humanity is also responsibility.
Okay.
In trying to encourage and to bring that along, to help humanity, so that it can be all it can be. I mean, just to love, that's fine for you individually, but then what about the other guy?
So give me an example, and I'm putting you a little bit on the spot here, but I'm curious to hear, how would you transform or put love into action? Pick something. Pick something.
Okay.
In a cultural way. Now I'm going to give you a challenge. Bring love to here. Pick some way to express love in a cultural way. What would you do?
Love it. Well, love in a.
What would you do?
You see, a cultural way is. You see, I don't believe in believing in love. I believe in experiencing love.
Okay, good, but put it in culture. Put in a cultural methodology. That's what I'm challenging you. I'm asking you.
That in my daily life, I relate to people, not so much in what I feel, but I feel empathy for those people. I try to understand. That's another very important thing, is understanding other people and what's going on.
But that's still individualistic. I'm trying to get you out of the individualistic path to the cultural path.
To help them and culture, as far as, let's say, pollution. You know, in encouraging other people to follow those practices in you know, reducing pollution. As far as that's concerned. You know.
Thank you.
Because that's then a responsibility to, hey, we got to improve,
I agree.
You know, our culture.
No, I agree. Responsibility is a part of the equation. Absolutely.
This man runs our discussion group on Sunday mornings. I think that's what he does for our culture.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
So about culture,
yeah.
I think there's one thing people are not very aware about the culture here is that I've been to quite a few organizations, and based on my observation, a lot of problems in these organizations are very similar. And I attribute to three of them. One is desire to feel superior than other people, desire to be seen as an authority figure, and desire to have control. And I think any organization, if they need to improve themselves, especially how they work together, they need to address all these three issues.
I totally agree. Totally agree. Then that would be a cultural transformation of the group or the organization, right? I agree, totally. In the back. And I try to do some of that in my other job as organizational development, which is to change the culture of an organization. You know, it's not easy, but it can be done. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think what's important with regard to global ethics, this is what we need to change. I think we need to think of people in other nations as just as important as people in our nations. So when people in another nation are killed, there are people, and it should be unacceptable to society. It should not be acceptable to promote your own nation, to exploit other nations, and so on.
I agree.
We need to think as one human family, and one example of this is the problem with ISIS. Innocent people are getting killed every day, and we say we don't want any boots on the ground.
Yeah.
If Americans were getting killed over there, we would have boots on the ground. The human family should have boots on the ground to go after these people in ISIS. So I think this is nationalism is like racism. We really have to get away from that.
Okay, thank you. Somebody else? We have time for
All right, and it looks like lunch is ready, so join me in thanking Manuel for a great presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions, your participation. Thank you.